we have since gone to the pediatrician after finding a new counselor, and things were going pretty well between my daughter and I, and we go for a pediatric appointment, and she was going to be evaluated for ADD. And so I don't know if you're familiar with what that looks like, but if you have a child that you are evaluating, if they're in a school, they want to send a packet for their teachers to fill out that kind of go over how they pay attention, how they behave in class, how do they get their work done, do they daydream a lot, whatever. There's, it's like 3 pages, check the boxes, some short answers. And I sent them all to school with my daughter, and I put a little note at the top, please get these back to my daughter by this date for our appointment on such and such date. And I get the paperwork back from some of her teachers, not all. And I'm reading the paperwork in the pediatrician's office. And I realized that the school has changed her name to her boy name. And they are using he, him pronouns in their short answers. And I was like, well, nobody ever talked to me about this. Now, at this point, I had said to my daughter, if your friends want to call you your boy name, I'm not going to tell them that they can't. Kids get nicknames all the time, first and foremost. So I didn't want to make a bigger deal out of a smaller thing than I needed to. Because again, we're trying to do that team effort, right? But it hadn't occurred to me that other adults might do this. And it certainly hadn't occurred to me that people in her school, her teachers, her counselors, or whomever would do this without talking to the parent first. And so I have since looked in the school's handbook, and I've looked at their mission statement on gender identity. And it basically comes down to they will not change their legal name in the records unless you bring them legal documents. But their practice is to affirm your child in their pronouns, in their name, and they are able to use the facilities that align with their identity, whether it be locker rooms, whether it be sports, whether it be on overnight field trips. And the school is under no obligation to tell parents if you have a trans-identifying child who is in the space with your children. So my daughter could go on an overnight school field trip, which, by the way, she will never do now until she's grown up and moved out. I'm not going to allow her to go on an overnight field trip because if you have a trans-identified male student who identifies as a female student, then that child will be and has to be housed with the other female students. And the same goes for teachers. If you have a trans-identified male teacher who identifies as a female, he is allowed to be a chaperone to your girls. And I'm sorry, if nobody is concerned about that, and I'm not saying because you're trans-identified that means you're a predator. I am not saying that, but I am saying that every single parent should be concerned, especially with teenagers, about having male-bodied people with our female students in that type of compromising position. It is a safety concern, and it is not okay to have male-bodied people in the bathroom, locker room, sports team, or overnight sleeping spaces with our girls. And it is absolutely not okay to have a male-bodied teacher in that position. Those things are not okay. So I go to the school, I go for a conference with one of the counselors, and the head of the counseling department. It was for an unrelated reason. My daughter her grades have been suffering immensely. And in the wake of all of this, my daughter went from a very strong, confident, bubbly young woman who walked with her head held high and her shoulders back and a certain level of she had a commanding presence at all 5'3", and as she's going through the different stages of her trans identity and of course being a teenager and just life in general, I've watched this child go from being 7 feet tall to kind of collapsing in on herself and becoming small and meek and scared. And it all kind of happened right around the time that boy was involved in her life. And I've since then watched her start to get a little more upright, and that's good, but I have definitely seen this happen. And
well, and the grades issue is interesting because I hear that from lots of parents that their children, when they take on a trans identity, it's not like all of a sudden their kids thrive. They tend they collapse in on themselves. Their grades suffer. They start to be really difficult at home. They seem unhappy. They seem tortured almost.
Yes.
And this is.
And as a parent, you want so badly to fix it, and So I go to the school and I talk to them, and they say, when I first sit down, your student, we've noticed your student's grades have dropped, and we're just curious to know, as a parent, if you can tell us maybe some things that are going on or some ideas that you might have. And I said, well, yes. So my daughter and I have been through a lot these last few years. We've moved a lot. I went through a divorce. You know, we lost family members. Like, we just really had been through a lot. I said, and in the midst of all of these changes and all of these things that are happening that were already hard enough to deal with, my daughter has started to identify as a young man, and I don't necessarily agree with her position on that. And it is causing a lot of problems between the two of us. It's certainly causing problems for her at school and her ability to pay attention. I feel like both of us are lost in this world, just in different spaces of it. You know, I'm lost in the space of information. What can I do to best help my kid? How can I prevent her from making dangerous mistakes for herself? And she's in a space of information. How can I be my best self, my most authentic self? How can I combat my problems with my parent? You know, so we're both like swirling in this, and sometimes we like bounce off of each other. Sometimes we slow down and, you know, wave as we go by. Sometimes we're like holding hands in outer space, and other times we just couldn't be further apart. But so it takes up an enormous amount of like space in your brain, and it's a constant thing. So I'm worried for her scholastically that this is causing problems among all the things that happen as a teenager that cause problems. And the school counselor says, okay, thank God you brought it up, because we're not allowed.
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, I'm sorry? He said, well, if you'll notice, I had to say your student, blah, blah, blah. I wasn't allowed to say your student's name. I'm not allowed to say, you know, your daughter's name. I'm not allowed to say your daughter's boy name. I have to say your student. Until you, as a parent, guide that conversation, there's nothing I can say to you about that, because you might not know what's going on.
Wow.
And I said, yes, funny you should bring that up. Yeah, you're right. I might not know what's going on, except I'm a very involved parent and I happen to know what's going on. And I did happen to notice when I took those forms to the pediatrician that all of her teachers are using her boy name and using her boy pronouns, and nobody talked to mom about this. He says, well, we're not allowed. I said, you're not allowed. You're not allowed to talk to parents about what's going on with their students in your school. I said, I'd also like you to know that I went to a recent event my daughter was part of, and one of her teachers came over and whispered something in her ear. My daughter responded to whatever was being asked of her or told to her. And I asked her later, I said, well, what was that about? Because first off, it was kind of creepy to see a teacher whispering in my child's ear right in front of me. Like, you know, I can see you, right? So I said, hey, what was that about? And she said, oh, well, he just wanted to make sure that it's okay that he uses my boy name in front of you. And I was like,
wow.
I was like, well, it is okay that he does that, but I feel like the fact that he felt that he had to ask you in a secretive way means that he already knows that it's wrong, that he's asking you that question. Adults should not be whispering to children about, in front of, behind their, I would never.
Secrets.
Yes.
They're keeping secrets from parents. They're grooming these kids to keep secrets from their parents.
Well, and the craziest part is, I think that I know this teacher well enough to know that in his world, what he is doing is being kind and compassionate, and doing, in his world, this is the right way to handle this situation, to be inclusive and to care for my child. And I don't think that he didn't get that idea from nowhere. That's what the world is telling these people right now. The world is telling people that the best way to protect children is to protect them from their own parents. And that's terrifying to me.
Yeah, because if kids don't trust their parents, if they don't feel like their parents have their back, if they don't feel like their parents are sort of their home base, then they're untethered. I mean,
and you can lose them so easily that way. You lose them so easily to this world, to all kinds of ideologies and all kinds of places. You know, we all had that one friend that had that mom who was so super cool. Like, we could go over to their house and you were guaranteed to be able to drink beer, smoke pot, smoke cigarettes.
That would be my mother, yes. Who,
okay.
You know, yeah, who put condoms in our stockings when we were 12. Who gave me Playgirl magazines. Everything was so cool. I could have boys sleeping over. It's not good.
There's a reason
it's not
that the
good.
other parents
It's terrible.
are trying to instill boundaries for their children. And when those other parents usurp your rights as a parent, and they offer this world to your children. It reminds me of, and I don't know if you've seen the animated Disney film Pinocchio, but when he goes to the island where all the boys are and they can just smoke cigarettes and drink beer and play cards. And at first it seems so cool, right? But all of these kids were being turned into literal donkeys and then made to work. Adults created this fantasy playland, and then these kids were turned into like a part of a workforce. And it isn't so different than these poor young women and young men who find themselves in sex trafficking. You know, grooming is a very real thing. And I'm not saying every trans person's mission in this world is to go out and to groom, but that's these particular things that teachers and doctors and mental health professionals are being told about this particular agenda are definitely relaxing the boundaries of safety for our children. They are making consent impossible. You no longer have the right to consent to who is in your space or who is not in your space. And while this may not be everybody's design, it is what is happening. What is happening is we have an entire generation of children that have no ability to truly consent medically, physically. They don't have the ability because it's been taken from them.
They don't get to choose who sees them naked, and they don't get to choose if they see a male body naked.
Right.
And they have no right to say they're uncomfortable about a male body in their spaces where they're vulnerable, because if they do, they'll be labeled a hater.
Yes. So it's very terrifying. So we went to the pediatrician with the forms. Oh yeah. So ultimately the school, you know, they are not my ally in this, although I can tell there are people there who would like to be. Their hands are tied and they are not able to be. So they are not a resource for parents for help with any of this. They are a resource for children to hide things from their parents, but not on the flip side of that.
And the thing that is important too is that, you know, if this were just, you know, a benign expression of self, you know, say the way maybe wearing combat fatigues was in the 60s, or, you know, goth, you know, then it would be less concerning that these kids are being affirmed. But the fact that being affirmed is likely to continue someone along the path towards harmful transgender treatments.
The medicalization.
That is what is so concerning, is that now you have teachers who and therapists and counselors at school and administrators at school who are basically encouraging kids along a path that involves self-harm.
Yes. So, so we talked about the school. Okay, so the ADD appointment, when we finally get there, to talk to the pediatrician. So, about 6 months, I'm trying to think, I'm sorry, about 9 months, around the time we first found a counselor, I took my son to the pediatrician. My daughter did not come with us that day. And the pediatrician, who, by the way, has been my pediatrician since before I even had children, because she was the pediatrician to the children I used to nanny when I was still a teenager. Had this woman a long time. I followed her all over the earth and back. I had a lot of trust and a lot of faith in her because, you know, when you first are pregnant and you're hearing about vaccines and you're scared about this and you're scared about that, I mean, she walked me through all of the, because I thought I was going to be a parent who didn't want to give my children vaccines. And she was like, you know, okay, I understand that position. They didn't have children in their practice that were unvaccinated. So, you know, we talked about my fears and my concerns. And, you know, she was able to put me at ease over something that for me was a really big, scary deal. So I've had a lot of trust and a lot of faith in her for a long time. Take my son for an appointment and she says to me, oh, how's your daughter doing? Last time we talked, you told me she was having a complication. Did you ever find a therapist? And I said, my gosh, yes, I did. But let me tell you how long it took me to find somebody who wasn't just going to like affirm her over the telephone sight unseen. I said, it's very hard for me as a mom to think that somebody that has never met her before could make such an important decision about a child they've never met. And the pediatrician says, well, you know, she's not wrong, right? I said, I know who's not wrong. She said, your daughter.
Oh.
And I said, with all due respect, you've known my daughter since 3 days after she was born. She's always been a girl. She'll always be a girl, even if ultimately in the end of all of this, if what my child chooses to do is to go through some level of hormone therapy, to have some level of surgical alterations, at the end of the day, she will always have been born a girl and she will always be a female-bodied person, however she alters that, you know? And the pediatrician's like, well, we can just agree to disagree.
Oh, wow.
Like, so
it's so
when I was
scary to me
pregnant with
when you
her,
have intelligent, educated people in authority who have bought into this hook, line, and sinker. It is just confounding to me. I mean, I just feel like the world's gone insane.
I kept thinking, I must not be hearing her right, you know? And so I said, well, you know, when I was pregnant with her and she was in my uterus and I went to have a sonogram done and they put the Doppler on my stomach on top of my uterus and you could see my infant daughter's uterus inside of my uterus on the Doppler, I'm pretty sure, call me crazy, that means she's a girl. And she was like, just keep her in counseling. And I was like, okay. So now I'm like terrified to take my kids to the pediatrician, right? Because I'm so afraid that the pediatrician is going to convince my child that I'm already more horrible than my daughter already thinks that I am. And I'm just like, I don't even know what to do. I don't even know what to do. So for almost 2 full years, I did not take my daughter to the pediatrician. And I know that sounds really, really bad. She wasn't sick.
It
She
totally makes sense.
any vaccines, I don't think.
I would be so mortified if that happened to me. I would
Right.
I would lose all confidence in the physician.
And that's what was happening to me.
I would
Who am
think,
I going to take her to?
buying into this, how can I trust you on anything?
Right. So I was very scared. But finally, it was coming time. You know, she was struggling in school. We'd missed almost 2 years worth of well visits. I was like, okay, I'm just going to have to like rally and do this. And we had dealt with, my son had been having some problems in school, and the school had social services come out to meet with us to try and see if there was anything they could do to help. Really, I think they were just checking to make sure my child was being fed and not abused. But, you know, they did offer some local community resources, which was nice of them, but they don't realize how resourceful I am. If there's a resource out there, I have already utilized it, or it's defunded and it's not available to us. Trust me, I've got these kids. Don't worry about it. But I was very, very scared when the social worker was coming out to the house, because my best friend's mom was a social worker. And she just retired in the last 5 years and was explaining to me that the last few years that she was working, with the level of sensitivity training that they had to go through when it came to gender identity, and the approach that they have to take. So if they go into a home where a child is being abused, or there is an accusation that a child is being abused, maybe it's very clear that they truly are. But when they go into these homes, despite these accusations of these very, you know, there could be drugs involved, violence, all kinds of things. And in the midst of all of those very real problems, one of the questions they're supposed to ask the kids, starting around age 3, is, do you identify as a boy or do you identify as a girl? A lot of very young children might not even really understand that question.
Yeah,
like maybe just earlier that day you were playing house with your next door neighbors and you were the dad. So today you're a young girl and you say, well, I'm a boy, because earlier you were playing dad because you guys, you know, I don't know.
And what a question. What a question.
Right.
That's not a question kids are supposed to be asked. It's like asking, you know, I can't even think of something.
No, right.
Is the sky green today, or is it red?
Right. It's so basic. You wouldn't think to even ask it, you know, you just wouldn't. So I think that in a lot of ways, it's just inflammatory and confusing from the get. And if these children had stated something other than what their biological reality was, the social workers were then expected to get their information to essentially whatever your local organization of WPATH is. You know, so WPATH is the World Professional Association of Transgender Care, or Healthcare. And then you have like different states, different counties. And so, yeah, so these parents then, in the midst of whatever else was going on, now have this particular problem to contend with. So here I'm freaking out. Oh my God, the social worker's coming out to our house. And so I sat my children down and I was very, very honest with my daughter. I said, listen, I need you to just hear me and understand some things. If this social worker comes tomorrow and asks you this question, I am never, ever going to ask you to lie. I don't want you to have to hide who you are. I don't want you to have to feel like you have to pretend to be somebody different. It's kind of my problem with this whole thing to begin with. But I need you to understand there is a very real possibility, depending on how you answer that question, will depend on what they do next. I said, this isn't a situation we've been through before, so I don't know what could happen. But I can tell you from the personal experience of somebody we actually know, this is what that scenario looked like. And there have been children who say, I identify different than my natal sex. And those children have had an advocate assigned to them who is basically like their medical advocate, their legal advocate. And now the parents have no choice to make decisions for these children anymore. And I said, and I know you and I don't always agree. I know you wish so badly that I would just affirm you in this identity and that I would allow you to have access to hormones, that I would allow you to have access to, you know, what she neatly likes to refer to as top surgery. I said, I understand that you would feel like that was how you would get your most support. I said, but what I also need you to understand is if I am no longer able to advocate for you and some stranger is, I just don't know how affirming how much you love the path that they're letting you take. I don't know if it will be worth it for you to not have me. So I'm not saying, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm not trying to make this a bigger deal than it is, but we don't know. I said, you have to be very careful how loud you are and to who, because even though you might be upset with me, I don't think you don't want to live with me. I don't think you don't want my input at all. And maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I could have been wrong, you know, but I said, I really feel like we need to be a team. And so social worker came, she basically looked around the house, never even like checked the fridge or clothes or shoes or anything. She talked to me for like 15 minutes. She said, we're going to go ahead and close this out. You know, here are some resources if you need them. Have a nice life. I was like, oh, all right, cool. Guess really, you know, we're fine. And so I felt a little ridiculous for having gone so far over the top.
However, I have heard of cases where a therapist has called social workers on parents who aren't affirming and threatened them, saying, you know, if you don't affirm them, I'm going to call a social worker. And I don't know if there are children who've been removed from the home, but if they're assigned an advocate, you lose all parental rights and oversight in that case. So to me, that is, and you also have this person with authority who's going to actively be undermining you again. And
Yes.
so I think your concerns are very valid.
And there have been some children as old as 16 and 17 who have been removed from non-affirming parents and moved in with affirming friends, relatives, or, you know, foster care situations.
The possibility is there.
Yeah, so it totally exists.
An unreasonable concern.
So maybe I was like a little too concerned, but at the same time, I don't know. And I'm like honest to a fault with my children. I've never been good at hiding things from them, keeping things from them, like to my own detriment, and maybe even to theirs sometimes. There's some things they just might not really even want to know, but I just have always felt like we only have each other. I am now in a relationship with somebody who's like my spousal adjacent, we'll call him, because we're not legally married, but I call him my husband. He calls me his wife because everybody else just assumes and we don't correct them. But, and I'm so fortunate to have like a good, strong partner in my life now, but for so very long, it was just the three of us. And so I've really tried very hard to make sure that we were a very strong team. So when you have
don't want to lose that oversight. I mean, that's the scary part, is that, you know, if a social worker comes in and determines that you are not affirming and assigns them somebody, you just lost. Yeah. I mean, you just lost. And
and truthfully, at the end of the day, my daughter's the one who will have lost.
Right.
Because I don't think, sorry, I'm at my friend's house and she's looking at me through the window. I don't think that anybody will ever be as critical as her own mom, especially being a Jewish mom. I don't think those exist. And sometimes being a parent is telling your children things they don't want to hear. Sometimes being a parent is not being ultra positive and affirming about everything. Sometimes that's just reality. It
almost reminds me of like having a social worker come in and say, we hear that your child has been using drugs and you're not affirming it. And so we're going to assign them somebody who will help them access amphetamines or morphine or, you know, barbiturates, whatever it is that they really feel like they need, because you're not providing that.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, that's how I feel. Yes, I feel that is happening. So thankfully, we had been through this thing with the social worker, and then we finally go for this ADD appointment that I keep bringing up and I keep not getting to, and I apologize. I'm all over the place. I should have made note cards. We get to the pediatrician after 2 years of me being too scared to take her to the pediatrician, and I am prepared. I am ready. I am solid. I am good. I am not going to react emotionally. I am not going to get loud. I am not going to cry. I am just going to be careful in the way that I answer questions, and I'm going to, you know, speak clearly, and we're going to talk about reality, and it's going to be fine. I can do this. Then I'm sitting in that waiting room and I'm reading those papers and I'm realizing that my child's school has changed her name and her pronouns. And all of a sudden I wasn't prepared. I was not prepared at all. And so now we go into the office and they call us back into the room, and we're in the room and the pediatrician comes in and she says to my daughter, "Hi daughter," or "Hi girl child." And then she stops and she says, "Well, wait a minute. Do you want me to call you your girl name or your boy name?" And my daughter looks at me and says, "It makes my mom uncomfortable. You can just call me my girl name." And I was like, wait a second. That's not what the pediatrician asked you. The pediatrician asked you, how would you like her to address you? And I've already said that your friends and other people can call you your boy name if that's what they would like to do. I'm just personally not ready to do it myself. I don't know if I ever will be. It might just be a mom thing. I don't know. So it starts off like awkward, right? And then so my child's like, "Well, then, my boy name's fine." And then the pediatrician says, "And do you want me to use, which pronouns do you want me to use?" And I said, "Okay, I'm sorry. I have to draw a line somewhere. And no, we're not doing pronouns. I'm sorry. We're not going to do that." And the pediatrician was flabbergasted, appalled. Like I had just smacked my child in front of her because I refused to allow the pronouns. I felt like I was giving a little with the name. I'm not like, I don't feel like it's right that I have to ignore physical reality in order for this conversation to go on. I didn't want to have a part of it. And I was not actually as animated in that conversation as I am right now. Because the more I look back on it, the angrier I get. But at the time, I was like pretty low key. And my daughter would even agree, because usually I'm pretty, she said, ultimately, she said, "Mom, you actually really did a good job of getting through that conversation." So the pediatrician's upset, and she like basically puts down her notebook and is just like looking at me very accusatory. She's standing in such a way that, like she's making herself bigger than she is and trying to intimidate me. And then ultimately we kind of have a little bit of back and forth, and I don't remember all of the things that were said exactly, but I was being very, what I thought, calm and rational. And she says to me, "You sound just like my mother-in-law." And I said, "Well, then your mother-in-law must be a very wise lady." And she says, "She felt exactly the same way you felt until our niece almost killed herself over her dysphoria." And I said, I'm so sorry that you are going through this also, first and foremost. I said, I am concerned that as a parent, if I affirm and assist my child in this way, and ultimately she still doesn't feel better and she still feels suicidal, I will have done her a great amount of harm. So we go back and forward for a little while talking about things, and she's getting a little over the top. And finally, I said to my daughter, I said, "Would you be more comfortable if I just went out in the hallway and let the two of you talk?" And she says yes. And so like things were a little heated when I walked out, but they weren't tragic. It was okay. And I waited for a while, very nervous. In fact, I'm like, why did I even offer to leave the room? But there were things that they wanted to talk about. Like she was talking about, she has a boyfriend. And so she was talking about her relationship with her boyfriend. And, some things had happened. And I just thought that she might feel more comfortable talking to her doctor than on me there. Anyway, so I'm out in the hallway and I finally get called back in. By the time I come back in, my child is like a puddle of tears. She is visibly very upset, snot, tears, rashy, puffy, the whole nine. And I was only out there like 5, 7, maybe 10 minutes. I come back in, she's a mess. The doctor still seems kind of hostile. And now I'm just like getting nervous and scared about the whole thing. And ultimately, what did the pediatrician tell? Oh, she says to me, and it happened again with the pediatrician, which blows my mind. She says, "Are you going to tell your mom or am I going to tell her?" And I'm looking at my child, and I don't even really care at this point what the pediatrician has to say. I want to go scoop my child up and she's way too big for it now, but I just want to hold her because like she's so sad. And the pediatrician says, "Are you aware that your child called a suicide hotline in the last few weeks?" And I said, "Well, I am aware that my child has been suffering with suicidal thoughts and ideations. We are addressing that with her counselor. Her counselor is aware. We've had appointments about it." I said, I didn't specifically know that she had called a suicide hotline. And I looked at my daughter and I said, "I'm very, very proud of you. That was very brave. Some people wouldn't be brave enough to call. some people might make a decision that could have harmed them. And I said, and I think it speaks volumes to how mature and responsible you really are, that you were able to make that choice and make that very hard phone call. I said, it's really very impressive to me. And I said, have you talked to your counselor about that phone call? And I don't remember if she said she had already talked to her, if she plans to talk to her, because things kind of went a little like in a whirlwind for me from there, because now the pediatrician is basically screaming down to me, if your daughter kills herself because you wouldn't affirm her as your son, you're going to feel awfully guilty. And I very, very calmly said to her, if my child grows up and is affirmed and transitions and still doesn't feel better and still kills herself, I'm still gonna feel guilty. So she encouraged us to go back to the counselor, the family counselor that we had way back in the beginning of all of this, that put my children in the very same position that the pediatrician had just put my daughter in. And my daughter and I both looked at her and said, no, we're not going back to that place. We know, the whole family agreed that that place was toxic for us.
Well, and I just want to interrupt because I'm thinking your daughter is, you know, emotionally in a very vulnerable place, and she just hears her pediatrician say, if she kills herself, it's your fault.
Basically, yes. And those were not her exact words, but in essence, I feel like that's exactly what she was saying. You know, I was going to feel awfully guilty should this thing happen. So I have not reported it as of yet to whoever you report medical abuse to. I tried to look it up.
What bothers me is that it's almost suggesting that suicide is a reasonable option.
Yes. Why would she? If she wanted to pull me out in the hallway to have this conversation, if she wanted to have my daughter, although I wouldn't have left my daughter alone that upset anyway, like if she'd had another like practitioner or somebody come in to stay with her, I might have then, but I was not going to leave her alone and crying like that. So I guess a part of me understands why we didn't step out, but a part of me is really, really angry. And what did she say to her while I wasn't in that room that started this emotional distress? I mean, it's obviously a distressing topic to begin with. But what was said when I wasn't in that room that caused it to become so, like, traumatic? You know, when a trauma happens, it's at like a 10, right? And then as you get farther and farther away from the trauma, it comes down and it comes down and it comes down, your emotional response to it. But then sometimes you might have something that will trigger that 10 all over again. You know, dealing with trauma is very significant that way. And it's like we were having a conversation where we were at like a 2 or a 3 in as far as a trauma response was concerned. And then I leave the room and I come back and we're at a full 10. We're at a full 10 trauma response because I left you alone with your pediatrician. I don't understand. So my daughter and I left there that day very upset, obviously, you know, and I'm not really sure what happened, but I went from being very sympathetic and very caring and very sad in that appointment to anger. And I was insisting that my daughter talk to me about this, because how dare that pediatrician treat me that way? How dare, and I could tell in some ways that my child felt vindicated. I could tell that she felt like, God, thank you. Somebody gets it and somebody's standing up for me. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not how you want somebody to stand up for you. This is not the right, what? So we kind of went back and forward on this. She stayed the night at a friend's house that night. I didn't stay at a friend's house, but I was on the phone with a friend for most of the evening. And
has your daughter ever said anything to suggest that she feels like you are pushing her to be suicidal?
She has said to me that she feels like, so in one conversation, she said, I feel like I have absolutely no support from you. And I just kind of cocked my head and looked at her. She's like, well, okay, I have lots of support from you. I mean, you support me in every way. You make sure I have somewhere to live, that I have somewhere to go to school, that I have food to eat, that I have clothes to wear, and you do support me as a person. And I know that you love me. I know that you don't support this. I was like, okay. And that's fair. That's fair. But to start with the statement, you don't support me, I have no support from you, I feel like that is coming to her, being fed to her from somewhere else, because clearly I obviously am supporting her. She has never told me outright that I'm causing her to be suicidal. We have dealt with...
And hopefully the doctor didn't, but I wonder if that's, I mean, I wonder if her extreme emotional response was because she's now being pitted against you. And we can only surmise what might have happened, but
Right.
based on what I hear and see is happening, it wouldn't surprise me if the doctor might have indicated that to her. And that's a horribly distressing thing to hear as a child, that your parent doesn't love you enough
Right.
to, I mean, that's incredibly distressing.
So ultimately, we did talk the next day, the day after. I'm not sure for sure. That time period is just a little, when things are super emotional, it's hard to keep the timeline straight. But she did say to me, she said, Mom, first off, I want you to know that I really think you handled that conversation with our doctor really well the other day. She said, I know it's hard for me. It's hard for you. It's a hard thing for us. She said, and, you can sometimes be really stubborn and angry and, combative. And she said, and you weren't combative with her at all. And I was like, damn, all right, thank you. She says, and I'm not going to lie, a part of me really felt like she was on my team, like she had my back when she was standing up to you. She said, but the more that I think about it, like, she didn't need to stand up to you. This wasn't a situation where I needed anybody to stand up for me or to you. She said, and the way that she talked to you was just so wrong. She said, I don't ever want us to go through something like that again. And I said, I don't ever want to go through something like that again either. What can we do as a mother and a daughter? How can we make sure you have the best medical, mental health care possible? And even though we don't agree, still be on the same team. And I feel like we've really been on a mission to have that team effort since then. I did try to find a new pediatrician, and this story might be a little long and you might want to trim it out. I don't know, but so I called around to a bunch of different pediatric practices, and I hope you don't mind. I'm going to smoke a cigarette while we talk about this part of this thing, because it's going to get a little weird for a minute. Okay. So I try to make, essentially I called around to all these practices, and I'm like, listen, I guess what I'm kind of looking for is like a newborn appointment. Like when you come in for the first time, except I don't have newborns. I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. So, but we need a new pediatrician, and I want to come see the practice. I want to come talk to the doctors. I have questions. And so one of the places did literally set me up for a new mom's tour. And I am not a small woman. I am very round, very jolly, if you will. And I'm very thick in the middle. And I'm obviously a lot older than most new moms would be. So I go to this appointment by myself, and I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of new moms, and or they're all pregnant still. They're probably 30-ish weeks. They're coming down the home stretch kind of deal. And they're all super cute, and they're wearing all their cute maternity clothes, and they're there with their husbands. They're all couples. And here I am by myself, this old woman with gray hair with this round belly. I must have looked so pitiful, just this old, sad, single mommy. And so the doctor comes in, and she talks to us all about this tour we're going to go on. And she answers some questions about what the first few days are going to look like. And after the baby's born, and we're going to go on this tour. And she says, before we go on the tour, does anybody have any questions? And I raised my hand, and I said, I do have a couple questions, but I would like to wait till the tour is over, and maybe I could just talk to you one-on-one. I said, my situation is very different than your situations. I said, you're all newly pregnant, and I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. So my problems are going to be totally different than anything that you guys are looking at, and I'm thinking to myself, most of these parents have probably just in the last few weeks either chosen to find out whether they're having a boy or a girl, have chosen not to find out whether they're having a boy or a girl, really wanted to know whether they're having a boy or a girl, but baby was uncooperative, or they've already been told the wrong thing. So they'll all figure that out, And where I am in the world is my child doesn't know if she's a boy or a girl. And the world is trying to tell me that I have to accept her as a boy, even though I know she's a girl. So these parents don't want to hear this problem, right? Bless their little hearts. They're sitting there with their little bellies, and they put their hand on it. It's okay. Go ahead. We want to know. And I'm like, you don't want to. I'm trying so hard to save them, right? And they're just so loving and accepting. And I'm like, all right, I just look stupid because I'm just refusing to answer the question. So I was like, okay, well, my situation is that my daughter's pediatrician essentially told me she was going to kill herself if I didn't affirm that she was a boy, because my daughter now thinks she's a boy. And so now I'm just trying to find a pediatrician who isn't going to tell me my child's going to kill themselves if I don't affirm her male identity. All of a sudden, those faces weren't so welcoming and accepting anymore. They were like, and you can see them all grab their stomachs, in a very protective way, you know, like, oh God. And then their poor ears, they were never going to unhear that. And I worry sometimes, you know, all of those moms have certainly had those babies by now. And I wonder how many of them like left there that day and went to research what is happening in the transgender world, and how many of them are going to be very like liberal and accepting parents of this ideology, and suddenly they're going to have a baby instead of a baby. I don't know if you've heard of the non-pronoun babies.
The baby.
Right. And right. How many of them are like, oh God, everything just needs to be like gender neutral now and we'll let our child decide? Or how many of them were like, oh Lord, how do we prevent this from happening? Which, by the way, there is nothing any of us can do that I'm aware of to prevent this from happening. I did find out after that appointment that day that if you want to have a new visit with a doctor or a pediatric doctor, what you are looking for is a consultation, not a newborn. Yeah, and I really wish that the person at the front desk had understood better what I was asking for and had given me the option or the opportunity to have a consultation one-on-one with a doctor rather than the group setting. But there we were.
Maybe you opened some eyes. I mean, because it's possible none of these parents have any idea what's going on, and they need to.
Right.
I mean, I've seen people criticized. I've seen obstetricians criticized and midwives criticized for for announcing the sex of the baby when it's born, and being told that we shouldn't be doing that. We should be saying it's a baby instead of it saying it's a boy or a girl.
Well, okay, maybe we don't need to put so much emphasis on how important it is whether it's a boy or a girl, but I think that it's important to know whether it's a boy or a girl.
I mean,
it changes things medically.
Medically, it changes things.
And for some parents who may
boys and girls get different
or not
treatment.
Circumcised,
right. I mean,
it matters.
And it's also truth. It is truth. It is either a boy or a girl. I mean, it's not, and that's where I get so frustrated. But just the whole idea that even is somehow transphobic to announce.
Well, and then if you're in the unfortunate situation of having a child that is, you know, born with a sexual disorder of some variety, it's important to start, like, you may not know that right away, but if you do notice, it's important for parents to know. You may not announce that the same way.
Right.
But I think that it's important to know the biological reality of your child, because it just changes
it does
things.
Influence things. And that's where I think, I even heard somebody talk, I think it was Miriam Grossman was talking about organ donation, and that, you know, women do better with organs from women, men do better with organs from men. I mean, medical care is different. So it's not just a social construct. Sex is a biological reality.
Absolutely.
So how did your perspective?
So I got a consultation after that, because I spoke with the doctor who did the tour, and she had told me she only had one transgender patient. And that patient had come to her after already having been through what level of hormones and surgeries that patient had been through. She didn't give me a lot of information, you know, because it's protected info. But she said that two of the other doctors there had significantly more transgender patients, and they were all in different various stages of some level or other of transition. And she thought that one of those two doctors might be able to better help me. So I booked a consultation with one of the two, and I went in and I kind of just ran down to them what had happened in my situation with our pediatrician. And I expressed that I really wanted to have like a holistic approach to care for my child, you know, space for her to explore things, but not to like rush anything or put her on the medical conveyor belt or blah, blah, blah. And it seemed like this doctor was like following along and listening, and he was taking notes, and we were talking, and I get to the end of my spiel and he says, well, so we don't do any hormones or surgery here. And I was like, all right, well, good, because that's not what I'm looking for anyway. And he says, so if what you're looking for is a whole package, then I would have to give you a referral to either the University of Maryland or Johns Hopkins University. I was like, but I don't want a package. I don't want a package. Why is there a package? Like, and so I think I said it very much like that. And he says, he looked at me like he was so confused. Like I was the first parent ever of any of these children that he has who was taking the position I'm taking. And I was horrified at the thought of that. So we ultimately ended up staying with our current pediatric group, but we are seeing one of the nurse practitioners. I called her after I finally found my daughter her new counselor, because after that appointment with her original pediatrician. The pediatrician called the counseling center my family did not want to go to. She called them and told them to expect my call. And then she had her receptionist call me to say to me, your doctor has called this therapy group and they are expecting and waiting on your call. And I said, thank you very much. And I didn't say anything else because I had told her, my daughter had told her, we had already made it very clear we were not going to go back to that practice. She must have a social worker there that she has an alliance with, is my only assumption. That's why she's pushing it so hard. I can't imagine what else it would be. But we finally did find another therapist, and I had started by, I had reached out to Sasha Ayad and I said, do you know of anybody who might consider themselves to be more of a, like, less of an affirming counselor, maybe more of a gender critical counselor. I mean, I don't know if anybody could even label themselves that way, but somewhere in between something, just because my daughter really needs somebody to talk to. She wasn't really getting along great with her current counselor anymore. She liked her, but this woman was a lot like me. My child doesn't want to go talk to somebody who's like their mom. They want to talk to somebody who's cool and hip like they are, you know? So I got an email back, and I will share it with you if you'd like. You can include it. I might have even shared it to the Compassion Coalition at some point, but I received an email back from a counselor at a practice who said that the practice he works for is generally a gender affirming practice, and he is considered a bit of a renegade in his field because he feels that gender identity is a highly nuanced, sensitive topic for teenagers that really needs to be thoroughly explored.
And he's a renegade for that rather moderate.
Wow. Renegade in his field.
Wow.
For using good evidence-based practices.
Wow.
So yeah, that really kind of totally
for those who don't know who Sasha Ayad is, I'm actually going to link to a video that she made that I think is really helpful. And one of the things that she recommends is maybe stay away from therapists.
Right.
Because they're undermining parents so much. And for a therapist to say that is really disheartening.
Right. And he wasn't wrong. Like, he is a renegade in his field. Unfortunately, he did not accept our insurance, and he would have been another of those like $200 an hour counselors that I just cannot afford. And I did find somebody ultimately who's willing to work on a sliding scale who has her pronouns in her email closure. So like, it's hard for me sometimes, but she and I did speak on the phone before she started meeting with my daughter, and I expressed to her my like very sincere, honest concerns. And she said that she absolutely understood why a parent would feel that way and think those things. And she said, I can't promise you that at some point in working with your child that I wouldn't take a more affirmative approach. She said, but I'm not ever going to know that without having spoken to your child, without having a chance to know them. She said, there's too much that is happening for somebody your daughter's age to just pinpoint one thing and assume that there's any one size fits all solution. So while she and I may see the world differently enough that I would never use my pronouns in my email closure, because I won't, you can't make me, I won't do it. We may be very different, but she seems very young to me. If I had to guess, she's probably like in her early 20s. She's hip with the kids' language. She seems to be a very smart person. My daughter has really made, as far as I could tell, a lot of good progress with her. Though I was really upset when I asked my daughter if, oh wait, let me pause on that for a second. So we're working with the new counselor. We do go back to the pediatrician finally, and we see the nurse practitioner there who I'd had a phone call with before I went in. I expressed to her my concerns. I told her I'd attempted to find another pediatrician. I would not be seeing the other pediatrician anymore. And she seemed not as horrified as I would expect that the pediatrician spoke to me the way she did. But at the same time, that's her colleague and also her employer, because our previous pediatrician owns the practice. So I think she kept a really good, even temper through the whole thing. And our appointment with her went fantastic. My daughter felt supported. I didn't feel bullied. So we really do have a good care team for her now. Finally, here we are, like 3.5 years in. But I finally feel like we have some good rapport going with some professionals, and my daughter and I have a good enough rapport going that I don't think anybody's feeling bullied. So when you asked me if I would interview with you, I thought to myself, you know, I've heard so many parent stories. I've heard so many kids' stories. I've watched transition videos, I've watched detransition videos. I see the kid's perspective, I see the parent's perspective. The only time that I've seen a parent-child culmination anywhere was when I found out about Fourth Wave Now, and then subsequently, a few years later, found out about the Peak Resilience Project, and then found out that the mom from Fourth Wave Now was the mom of one of the daughters from the Peak Resilience Project.
I didn't actually know that.
And they didn't know that at first either. Really, really cool story. Like those women, and you might want to put some links in for any parents who aren't familiar. But yeah, so this mom started this blog out of desperation and anonymously because she had nowhere to turn. And I found her blog when I was in the very beginning of all of this. And from Fourth Wave Now, I was able to find Sasha Ayad. I was able to find Magdalene Burns. I was able to find Peak Trans. I have found so many resources and compassionate resources for people who are suffering from gender dysphoria and what that looks like for them and for their families. And so,
well, and I think that that's important because I've actually had some disagreements with some of the opposition to the trans movement who are very critical of even talking about gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
And as someone who had gender dysphoria, I can attest that it is a very real mental health condition.
Yes.
And it really needs to be addressed. It can be debilitating. I did so much self-harm to myself. And so I think that there needs to be this nuance where we can't just say, well, we just need to ignore gender dysphoria, pretend like it doesn't exist. It is a real thing. And these kids do need support. And not just kids, adults. I mean, it's potentially a very debilitating mental health condition. And I can't imagine, people saying that about anorexia or OCD or something, just saying, oh, well, we're going to say that doesn't exist. That's fiction because we don't like the narrative behind it.
Yeah, no.
Instead, I'd rather say, we need good support for these people because they do have these issues that are very concerning. And we want to make sure that these kids make it and get through to adulthood. And we want to be compassionate.
Well, and I think, like you said, in some cases, parents are even being cautioned not to take their child to a therapist. But I can tell you myself personally, the trauma that I experienced as a child and some of the things that I went through and my body image issues, if I had not had good supportive counseling, I don't know that I would have recovered to the extent that I have and that I would be as whole and healthy and happy as I am. And I was in a lot of toxic relationships when I was younger, and I needed the critical eye of a therapist to not accept my bullshit or my apologist behavior towards people who were abusing me. I needed that person to point out to me what is happening, what you were doing, the decisions you are making are dangerous for yourself, and you need to get yourself in a healthier situation. I needed somebody to do that for me. So I've always been very pro mental health. And so it was very hard for me to not be able to have my daughter have a good connection with a good counselor who was really trying to give her the best in that situation. And I was just
those skills. I mean, one of the things that I learned in therapy is that if I start, those really damaging thoughts of I'm not the right kind of woman, I have a male brain, I think more like a male, those thoughts do creep in even now. I'm all grown up,
right,
and I'm very critical of all this. Things will happen, and those thoughts will just sort of bubble up every once in a while. And I have the skills now to say, wait, that's not true.
Right.
I'm moving on. I'm not
you
going
can disrupt those invasive thoughts.
Right. I'm going to. Yeah, I'm not. Instead of perseverating on it, I'm not humoring it. I am dismissing it, and I am moving on. And
acknowledged and dismissed.
Right. And those skills are useful in a whole range of things. I mean, that's such an important skill, and I don't think kids have those skills now. So if a therapist can give a child that skill so that they realize when they get a thought that is damaging or critical or unfair to themselves, they get to choose whether to say, yep, that's true, or nope, that is absolutely not true, go away.
Right.
I'm going to choose to think differently, because we do have the ability to choose how we think, and our thoughts influence our feelings and behaviors.
Yes, absolutely. And I totally forgot where I was going.
Well, we need to finish up pretty soon. Yeah. Anyway, is there anything else that you feel is you really want to share?
Okay. So I remember where I was going now. So when I first talked to you about doing this interview today, I had really thought you know what would be awesome is if my daughter would be willing to do some portion of this interview with me, only because I feel like we have a team effort and have had a team effort going on that I don't see with a lot of parents in this situation or with children in this situation. And even though we don't agree with each other on a lot of things, we've still been trying very hard to stay on the same team. And I just thought, you know, I figured you and I were going to talk about a lot of stuff that she might feel very differently about, and she might be able to give us a little bit of a perspective. I don't know. I just thought it would be really interesting because it isn't something I've seen done yet. And I sent her some links to your content, and it was a hard no from her. and
I realize now contextually, I should have probably sent you a different link because I didn't have a good understanding of where she was.
It's really okay. It's totally fine. And I don't know that she's at a space where she can appreciate anybody who feels the way her mother feels, you know, and she really particularly doesn't like Magdalene Burns. And that really breaks my heart because she was like my shiro, you know. She used to message me after she would do videos. She would message with me while she was uploading. You know, it was like a good time for her to have some downtime. And I just had no idea how.
I'll include a link to her too. People may not know who she is, but and that's something that those of us who have been in this and watched it, she died, and it was incredibly awful to see the response from the trans activists who were celebrating. They were celebrating her
in the most
in
horrific.
A way it was shocking to me, and it reinforced to me the idea that this is not about people's rights. This is about oppressing other people. This is about, and especially women who are standing up for women's rights, because that's what Magdalene was doing.
Absolutely.
And the posts that they were they were so cruel and so dehumanizing to her. It really showed me that this is not a movement that is being fueled by love.
I am a Jewish American woman, and I would not say the things about Hitler that those people said about Magdalene. Full stop. So I can't understand anybody who could be involved in any level of a movement that could be that ugly. And I'm not saying that all people that have gender dysphoria or who are transgendered or who are transsexual are like those people.
But
I know that there are extremists.
People who are pushing this agenda are not doing it out of love. This is not a movement about marginalized people who are being oppressed. This is a movement that is being fueled by hatred and by trying to usurp the rights and privileges of people who need them. I mean, to suggest that it's unreasonable for women and girls to want to shower with other women and girls, and that we're in fact hateful for wanting that is outrageous to me. And yet we're being called the oppressors in this case, and they're the victims in this case, and that's just not true. And you can tell the people with power are the ones who are writing this narrative. It's not women and girls who are writing it.
No, it definitely isn't. But yeah, so I told my daughter ultimately, you know what, I totally get it. If you're not in a space that you want to do this, that's totally fine. I said, if you do find a platform where you're comfortable that you would like to maybe do a mother-child like video question and answer, you know, let me know, and I would be willing to do that with you, because I think we have a unique bond and situation that a lot of other parents and kids don't have. And so she says to me, you know, I love you very much, but truthfully, I really kind of hate you a lot, and I think it's going to be hard when I leave, when I grow up, because so many things are going to change, and I don't know that I'll be able to come back. And I was like, well, that's a little extreme. And it was just really telling, because I had just finished my interview for that book, and the lady who was interviewing me asked me, has your child ever threatened to withhold their love or their affection or their relationship status from you if you don't agree with them? And I was like, no, thank God, that's not anything I've ever had to deal with. But then here we are, less than 24 hours. No, it was actually that very same night. It was that same night. She said that to me. And she said, you know, well, when I leave, all these changes are going to happen, and I don't know that I'll want to come back. And I said, well, I just want to kind of put it out there in the universe that for 16 years, I have never abandoned you. I have never left you. And while we may not agree on a grand number of things, I would never just walk away from you. So I hope that you don't grow up and ghost me. You know, I would hope that when you would leave, that we would have communication. We would have So I would know where you are and I would know what was going on. I'd be a part of that journey. Even if we're physically apart, I would still be a part of that journey. And you would allow me to have some time and space to come to terms with where you are in that journey, so that when I do see you, it doesn't have to be weird or awkward or any of those things. And she never like answered to any of that, you know, and she just like went inside and went to bed. I'd been picking her up from work and we got home. I parked the car. She got out of the car and went inside, and we really haven't talked about anything of any substance since. And so here I was thinking that my child was not, but I feel like that statement was very clear that she is at a point where she is thinking that she doesn't want a relationship with me if I don't accept the way that this is going for her. And I had no idea my journey had changed so drastically in such a very short period of time. So I don't know.
It's so sad that that kind of emotional blackmail is being used against parents. And it makes me sad for both the parent and the child, because I think that this kind of, I mean, most parents and children do have difficulties. They don't agree on things 100%. And that was something that families learn to live with and joke with and cry about sometimes. But now children are being told, if you don't agree with your parents and if they don't agree with you, you don't have to have anything to do with them. You can sever that relationship and go find glisten or glitter or glamour or unicorn parents. Go find a new family. You don't have to be affiliated with a family. I just actually watched a video, and it was a therapist who was basically saying that, you know, your biological family isn't that important. And so if they don't affirm you, that's okay. You can just go find a family that does. So this is a narrative that kids are being fed, and they don't realize that's fine. They don't realize how much this is going to hurt, that these are precious relationships. And if you sever relationships just because somebody disagrees with you, you're never going to have good, long-term, fulfilling relationships.
No.
I'm so sorry. Well, I really appreciate you sharing, and I hope that things do improve and that this is just a teenagers do kind of go through phases.
Right.
And
They're ups, they're downs.
are just mad at their parents. I mean, I remember I have grown kids, and there were a couple of times when they were just so angry with me. And we have really good relationships now. So part of it is being a teenager, but part of it is that this is a normal feeling. These are normal feelings for teenagers have. What's not normal is therapists and teachers and pediatricians telling them that their parents are bad for not affirming them, and that it's okay to sever these relationships. That's what's new.
Well, and I think ultimately, and I might have touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's like my child found the one thing that I couldn't support or accept, being this very, you know, like I had all natural unmedicated labors and deliveries with both her and her brother. I'm a very anti-medicalized things kind of person. And my daughter is on a mission. Although while we were under quarantine, she did decide that she may not be male. She may in fact be non-binary. She still wants to use he, him pronouns, and she still wants to have access to hormones and surgery. So it's like she has found this path of medicalization that is like her focus. And if she has to interact with people who don't subscribe to the thoughts and the feelings that she has about it, she's in constant conflict. So all I am to her is a reminder of this constant conflict. And she doesn't want that type of negativity in her life right now, you know. But I am hopeful, much that I would be were she an adult who was gonna, you know, say she was pregnant, she was gonna have a baby. I would automatically be like, yay, we're going to call the midwives and we're going to get you appointments with the birthing center. And, you know, and she might be the kind of person who says, no, we're not going to a hospital. I'm going to have a hospital birth. And I would like to have an epidural and I would like to have an IV. And I don't want this natural crunchy granola hippie mama thing you did. I want to be in a hospital. And there would be parts of me that would have a conflict with that, because I know that sometimes an intervention leads to an intervention leads to an intervention. And if you start in a place where interventions are the common practice, you may find yourself not in control of a lot of those interventions. And so I would be nervous and scared for her, and I would try to tell her those things, you know, but I would not write her out of my life because she didn't choose to give birth in a birthing center. I wouldn't not show up if she wanted me to be there for her labor and delivery. I would still be there, even if it was in the hospital. I feel like when you break everything down to the most fundamentals of everything that's going on here, is that I'm just not a medicalized type person. She's looking at this in a very medicalized kind of way. I am very concerned about these core issues. And Right now, she doesn't want to hear anything from that other side. She really only wants to hear stuff from this side. And unless I'm going to be quiet and not point things out, she and I are going to be in conflict. And I'm just going to have to accept that. And she can or not accept it. That's completely up to her.
But the fact that she has this sort of ace in her pocket, that she can manipulate it by saying, well, I'm going to ghost you. I'm going to cut you out of my life if you don't affirm me. That changes things. I mean,
it does. It doesn't for me in some ways, because I am not going to I'm going to still identify reality. I'm going to still love her, whether she chooses to accept that affection, whether she chooses to stick around for it. I know at the end of the day that I have done and will continue to do everything I can to give her the best possible chances in this world. And whether she chooses to accept that or not, I can't be held responsible for. You know, you can lead a horse to water.
Right. And the
Literally
other thing,
can't make them drink.
The other thing that I think it's important for parents to know, and in your case, even if your daughter does go away for a year or two, if she knows you're there with open arms waiting for her, there's a better chance that she'll come home. And I do see some parents who get so angry about what's happened that they close the door as well.
Yes. Yes.
And I just want to urge parents to keep that door open, because those kids.
Well, and to the extent that you can, for your own mental health and well-being too.
Well, and you can always keep the door open, even if you don't, you can say, I don't agree with you, but I love you. And I think that's a message that we've lost. There's this idea that that it's too judgmental to suggest that you don't agree with someone now, or that you can't love someone who you disagree with. And it's so important that you can love the person and disagree with the behavior. And that's something it seems like we've lost sight of as a society.
And I've let her know that if she chooses to go on to use hormones or any type of chemicals or have any type of operations or procedures, will I be sad that ultimately she couldn't accept herself for who she was, how she was naturally? Of course I will be. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to show up with chicken soup when she's not feeling well from treatments or procedures, or while she's healing. Like, I'm not a monster. I'm her mother, and I love her. And I might even go so far as to make the soup from scratch, So I don't want her to think that I'm going to abandon her, that I'm going to leave her in her time of need if it comes to that. It is very sad to me that she's at a petulant place right now, that she would threaten to, not do the same for me. But she has to find her own way and her own independence. And I just can keep trying. I mean, our reward for taking the higher road at the end of the day is the opportunity to continue taking the higher road. That's it. Right. There's no special bells or whistles or prizes. We just get the opportunity to keep trying. So.
Well, Brynne, thank you so much for sharing. These are tough things, but I feel like you've been so articulate, and you have so much.
Thank you, because I did not feel articulate. I felt like I was out in outer space somewhere a lot of times.